is alive! What? No, it can't be!
The words ripped through the cemetery like a gunshot through silk. The priest's benediction died in his throat. The morning air, thick with the cloying sweetness of lilies and the darker scent of gun oil, seemed to solidify around the gathered mourners. The funeral froze. Rows of men in tailored black suits and mirror-dark sunglasses stood like an army of statues among the headstones. At the center, beneath a white canopy that snapped softly in the breeze, Don James Verratti lay in an open casket lined with white satin, his body draped in gold chains that caught the light like warnings. Around him, the 5 families had gathered, wolves dressed as mourners, each calculating how to carve up his territory before the earth even touched his coffin. But now every head turned, every hand drifted toward concealed weapons. The woman who'd shouted stood at the security perimeter, chest heaving, dark hair whipping across her face. Sandra Dannison wore a simple grey dress and an apron still dusted with flour from the morning's work. Her shoes were scuffed from running. She looked nothing like the polished crowd of criminals and their perfumed wives. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a maid, the help, invisible. Except she wasn't invisible now. She was sprinting past the first line of guards, dodging their reaching hands with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to move through spaces without being seen. Her voice didn't waver, even as her body trembled with adrenaline. "Check his pupils!" she screamed, pointing at the casket. "It's tetrodotoxin. He's paralyzed, not dead." "Who the hell is that?" A capo muttered from the 3rd row, his hand already on his pistol. "The housekeeper," someone replied, the word dripping with contempt. Verratti's housekeeper. At the head of the casket, Lucy Verratti rose like a goddess of vengeance draped in black silk and pearls. Her face was a mask of grief, red-rimmed eyes, trembling lips, one gloved hand clutching a handkerchief. But her other hand made a sharp, cutting gesture toward her security detail. "Remove her. Now." 2 guards in dark suits moved to intercept Sandra, but she was already past them, vaulting over a low iron fence with surprising grace. She wasn't running toward the crowd for comfort or answers. She was running toward the body. "Don't let her near him." Lucy's voice cracked with what sounded like anguish, but looked like fury. Sandra didn't stop. She crashed through the final line of guests, and stumbling between the marble-faced underbosses and their jeweled wives, and threw herself against the casket's edge. Her hands reached not for James's face in tenderness, but for his wrist, checking for a pulse with the precision of someone who'd done it before. The crowd surged forward. Shouting erupted. A guard grabbed Sandra's arm, trying to wrench her away, but she twisted and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with brutal efficiency. He doubled over, gasping. "Look at him!" Sandra shouted, her voice raw. "Look at his eyes!" And they did. Don James Verratti lay perfectly still in his expensive suit, hands folded across his chest, face peaceful. But as the mourners leaned closer, they saw it, the thing that made the air turn to ice in their lungs, a single tear tracking slowly down his temple. His eyes were open, just barely, and the pupils were contracting in the sunlight. The corpse was watching them. Lucy Verratti's mask shattered. "She's insane! She's trying to—" But Sandra was already moving. She grabbed the white pillow beneath James's head and yanked it away, her other hand hovering over his chest, counting compressions that weren't compressions at all but something else. A pattern, a code, something only someone who'd cleaned up after mob executions would recognize. "He can hear us," Sandra said, her voice dropping to something cold and certain. "He's been conscious this whole time." The funeral exploded into chaos. But in that moment before the shooting started, before the screaming and the running and the blood, Sandra Dannison locked eyes with Lucy Verratti across the open casket of the man they'd both loved, both betrayed, both needed alive or dead, and Lucy's perfectly painted face twisted into something ugly and true. "You shouldn't have come back," her expression said. Sandra's eyes blazed in response. "I never left." Then James Verratti's chest rose, shallow, aching, impossible, and sucked in his first real breath in 2 days. The Don wasn't dead, and now neither woman was safe. "Hey, tell me what position you are in now in the comments. Let's continue." James Verratti's body convulsed like a man surfacing from deep water. His back arched off the satin lining, chest expanding in a desperate, rattling gasp that echoed across the cemetery. The sound was animal, raw and terrifying, the noise of a man clawing his way back from the edge of death. The funeral shattered. "Boss!" One of the older capos lunged forward. His weathered face split between shock and something that looked dangerously like hope. But 3 others stepped back, hands sliding inside their jackets, fingers finding steel. In the underworld, resurrection wasn't miracle, it was threat. A dead Don was predictable. A living one could remember who'd already started dividing his empire. Lucy Verratti stumbled backward, her heel catching on the grass. The grief mask she'd worn so perfectly cracked down the middle, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a woman who'd orchestrated this entire performance, she hadn't written a script for this scene. Sandra didn't wait for anyone to recover. She grabbed the massive floral wreath propped against the casket, white roses the size of dinner plates wired to a frame of iron, and heaved it up like a shield. The thing weighed 40 pounds easy, funeral home excess masquerading as sentiment. She raised it just as the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet punched through petals and stems, stopped by the decorative frame. White petals exploded like shrapnel, drifting down around Sandra's shoulders as she kept her body between the gun and James. She didn't see who fired. Didn't need to. In a crowd of 50 mobsters, the shooter could be anyone Lucy had paid better than James ever had. "Get him out!" Sandra shouted, though she wasn't sure who she was shouting to. The old guard who still remembered loyalty? The soldiers too confused to pick a side? James was thrashing now, his nervous system rebooting in agonizing spasms. His fingers clawed at the casket's edge, but his legs wouldn't respond. The tetrodotoxin had kept him locked in his own body for 48 hours, conscious but paralyzed, able to hear every eulogy, every whispered plan to carve up his territory. Now the poison was releasing him in stages, and the process looked like drowning in reverse. "Sandra!" His voice was gravel scraping against broken glass. He tried to sit up and failed, his arms shaking with the effort. Another shot. This one from the left, closer. Sandra swung the wreath like a battering ram, blocking her peripheral vision but buying them seconds. The heavy frame connected with someone, a wet crunch and a grunt of pain. And she let it drop, lunging for James instead. She got her arms under his shoulders, her back screaming in protest as she hauled him upright. He was dead weight, 6 feet of muscle and expensive tailoring that couldn't support itself. His head lolled against her shoulder, breath hot and ragged against her neck. "Lucy!" someone shouted. "Do we kill them both?" Lucy's voice cut through the chaos, no longer the grieving widow, but the woman who'd arranged this funeral in the first place. "She's kidnapping him! Stop her!" The crowd split down invisible lines. Half the men drew weapons, the other half dove for cover behind headstones and monuments, years of survival instinct overriding any sense of loyalty. The distinction between friend and enemy had dissolved the moment the corpse had gasped back to life. Sandra dragged James backward, her heels digging into the soft cemetery grass. He was trying to help, and his legs jerking uselessly as feeling slowly returned in pins and needles agony. They made it 3 steps before a bullet took a chunk out of the marble angel to their right, stone chips peppering Sandra's face. She changed direction, pulling James toward the cluster of parked cars behind the tent. The hearse sat idling 20 yards away, black and gleaming, its driver nowhere in sight. Either he'd run or he was one of Lucy's. Didn't matter. Sandra needed wheels, and she needed them now. James found his voice again, stronger this time. "The butcher!" He coughed, struggling to get the words out. "Lucy's with the butcher. He's here." Sandra's blood went cold. The butcher was Salvatore Gallo, capo of the Gallo family, and James's oldest rival. If he was here, this wasn't just Lucy's coup. This was a coordinated hit across family lines. She spotted him then, standing calm as a stone in the center of the chaos. A thick man in an immaculate suit, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone watching a play he'd already seen. When his eyes met Sandra's, he smiled. Not a threat, just acknowledgement. "You were right to run," his expression said. They reached the hearse. Sandra propped James against the rear door and ripped it open. The casket inside had been removed. They'd planned to use it for the burial, leaving an empty cargo space lined with black velvet. "In," she ordered. "I'm not—" James started to protest, pride flaring even now. "In, or I leave you here for your wife." Sandra's voice was flat, final. He climbed in, crawling on hands and knees that barely functioned. Sandra slammed the door and sprinted for the driver's seat, the glass crunching under her shoes. The windshield had a bullet hole spiderwebbing from the center, but the engine was running. She threw the hearse into drive just as the butcher's men opened fire in earnest. The hearse lurched forward before Sandra even had the door fully closed. Bullets punched through the rear panels, muffled thumps that sounded like fists against a drum. She cranked the wheel hard right, tires chewing through manicured cemetery grass and spitting up divots of earth and wildflowers. "Get up here!" She screamed back toward the cargo hold. James was already moving, dragging himself through the narrow pass-through behind the driver's seat. His legs still weren't cooperating, flopping uselessly as he pulled his body weight with his arms alone. He collapsed into the passenger seat with all the grace of a sack of concrete, and his shoulder slamming against the dashboard. Sandra punched the accelerator. The hearse was built like a luxury tank, long, heavy, designed for dignity, not speed. But the engine had torque. They shot down the cemetery's main path, weaving between the neat rows of headstones. Behind them, the white funeral tent collapsed as men scrambled for vehicles, shouting orders that contradicted each other. "Glove box." James gasped, fumbling with the latch. His fingers were shaking, nerves still misfiring from the toxin. He finally got it open and pulled out a Beretta 92, checking the magazine with muscle memory older than his marriage. "Yours too." Sandra spared half a second to yank open her side. Another pistol, this one a compact Glock. Odd she left it there. Both hands welded to the steering wheel as she took a hard left turn that sent James slamming against his door. "Christ, Sandra, shut up and shoot!" The cemetery gates loomed ahead, wrought iron and stone columns that looked more decorative than functional. They were wide open. No one had expected anyone to need a quick exit from a funeral. Sandra aimed the hearse straight down the center and hit the gas harder. Behind them, engines roared to life. A black Mercedes SUV shot out from behind the mausoleum, followed by 2 sedans and something that looked like a modified Charger. Lucy's people, or the butchers. At this point, the distinction was academic. The hearse blew through the gates and fishtailed onto the main road, rear end swinging out in a wide arc. Sandra fought the wheel, got it straightened, and immediately had to swerve around a minivan whose driver laid on the horn like that would help. They were on public streets now, morning traffic building, civilians everywhere. James rolled down his window and twisted in his seat, the Beretta steady despite his shaking hands. The Mercedes was closing fast, 30 yards and gaining. He fired 3 shots in controlled succession. The first 2 sparked off the hood. The third took out the driver's side headlight and sent the SUV jerking left into the opposite lane. "How many?" Sandra snapped, eyes on the road. 4 cars, maybe 15 men. James ejected the magazine, checked it, slammed it back home. His voice was getting stronger, the paralysis retreating inch by agonizing inch. "Lucy's not in any of them. Aye, she's too smart." "She's smart enough to frame this as us attacking the funeral." Sandra cut across 2 lanes, earning a symphony of horns and a near miss with a delivery truck. The hearse's suspension groaned but held. "By tonight, you'll be the villain and she'll be the victim." "I know how it works. I invented how it works." One of the sedans pulled up on their left, passenger window already down. Sandra saw the gun before James did and jerked the wheel right, putting the hearse between them and the shooter. Bullets stitched across the driver's side, punching through the door panel inches from her ribs. She didn't flinch, just held the turn and forced the sedan into the curb. It clipped a fire hydrant with a metallic scream and fell back. "We need to lose them before the interstate," James said, scanning their surroundings with tactical focus. The poison was clearing fast now, adrenaline burning through what remained. Too many cameras, too many cops. Sandra spotted an opening, a narrow access road that cut through an industrial park. She took it without signaling, the hearse barely fitting between the concrete barriers. The road was potholed and cracked, designed for delivery trucks, not high-speed chasers. The suspension bottomed out twice, sending up sparks. The Charger tried to follow. It was wider than the hearse, and faster but less forgiving. The driver overcorrected coming out of the turn and clipped the barrier, sending the rear end spinning. It crashed sideways into a loading dock, steam erupting from the crushed hood. 2 down, 2 to go. The industrial park opened onto a maze of warehouses and rail yards. Sandra took them deeper, tires screaming around corners, James calling out obstacles she couldn't see. The remaining Mercedes and sedan stayed locked on them, professional drivers who knew how to tail without closing distance. "They're hurting us," James said, realization hitting him like ice water. "They want us boxed in, not dead." "Lucy wants you alive?" "Lucy wants the ledger codes. Only I have them." He checked his phone, waterlogged and dead from 2 days in the casket. "And she'll torture them out of me before she lets me die." The road dead-ended at a chain-link fence. Beyond it, train tracks stretched into the distance. Sandra didn't slow down. "What are you—" She hit the fence at 40 miles per hour. Chain-link tore like fabric, wrapping around the hearse's grille as they crashed through onto the gravel rail bed. The hearse bounced violently, James's head cracking against the ceiling. Sandra kept the accelerator pinned, driving parallel to the tracks, the vehicle shaking itself apart beneath them. Behind them, the Mercedes tried to follow. It made it through the fence but bottomed out on the gravel, sparks flying as it scraped to a halt. The sedan was smarter, stopping short and reversing. Sandra spotted a service road ahead, actual pavement, and aimed for it. They hit the transition at an angle that nearly rolled them, 2 wheels lifting off the ground before gravity slammed them back down. Something in the undercarriage snapped with a sound like a gunshot, but they were moving, and the cemetery was 3 miles behind them. James finally lowered the gun, breathing hard. "Where'd you learn to drive like that?" Sandra's knuckles were white on the wheel, her whole body trembling with adrenaline crash. "I told you, I wasn't always a maid." The Stardust Motor Lodge sat on the kind of forgotten highway exit, where businesses went to die slowly. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, missing half its letters, so it just read, "Stardust." Sandra pulled the battered hearse around back, parking it between a rusted dumpster and a van with no wheels. Nobody would look twice at another piece of automotive wreckage here. James could walk now, barely. Sandra got her shoulder under his arm and helped him across the cracked pavement to room 12. She'd paid cash to a desk clerk, whose eyes were clouded enough not to ask questions about the man in the funeral suit or the woman with graveyard dirt on her dress. The room smelled like cigarettes and disinfectant fighting a war neither could win. Sandra kicked the door shut and deposited James on the bed closest to the bathroom. He collapsed onto the polyester comforter, his body finally giving up the fight it had been waging since his resurrection. "I need a shower," he muttered, but he didn't move. Couldn't move. The adrenaline that had carried him through the chase was gone, leaving only the aftermath of 48 hours spent paralyzed in his own body. "You need water first, and food." Sandra was already moving, checking the windows, pulling the blackout curtains tight. Old habits. She'd cleaned enough mob safe houses to know the protocol. "When did you last eat?" James let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Thursday, before the dinner." His eyes tracked her movements around the room, something sharp and calculating breaking through the exhaustion. "You knew about the tetrodotoxin. I know what a corpse looks like." Sandra filled a plastic cup from the bathroom sink, brought it to him. "You weren't one." He drank like a man who'd crossed a desert, water spilling down his chin. When the cup was empty, he held it out for more, and Sandra refilled it twice before he finally spoke again. It was supposed to be temporary. His voice was hoarse, damaged from days without use. "The funeral was my idea, my way out. You don't retire from this life, Sandra. You know that. You leave in a box or you don't leave at all." Sandra sat on the opposite bed, finally allowing herself to stop moving. Every muscle in her body ached. So you faked your death. With Lucy's help, or so I thought. James stared at the water-stained ceiling, his jaw tight. "We had a doctor, one of ours. He administered the toxin, just enough to simulate death for 72 hours. Heart rate drops to almost nothing. Breathing stops. Body temperature falls. But you're conscious, aware, trapped. And then I was supposed to wake up in a crematorium before the flames started. Lucy would call off the cremation at the last second, claim she couldn't go through with it, wanted burial instead. The doctor would reverse the toxin. I'd be awake and out before anyone knew." He laughed again, bitter and raw. "We'd already moved half the assets offshore, new identities, a villa in Portugal. I was going to disappear, and she'd play the widow for 6 months before joining me." Sandra watched him, piecing it together. But she changed the plan. She made it permanent, or tried to. James finally looked at her, and his eyes were dark with something between rage and grief. "The doctor who was supposed to wake me up? Dead. Car accident 2 days before the funeral. Convenient. And Lucy doubled the dose when she gave me the poison. Enough to keep me under for days, not hours. By the time I was supposed to wake up naturally, I'd have been 6 feet under or burned to ash." The room was quiet except for the hum of the ancient air conditioner. Sandra processed this, turning it over in her mind like evidence at a crime scene. "The diamonds," she said finally, "in the casket lining. I saw them when I pulled you out." James's expression shifted, surprise mixed with respect. "You don't miss much. I've been cleaning your houses for 3 years. You think I don't know where you hide things?" Sandra leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "She was going to bury you with millions sewn into the coffin, dig you up later when no one was watching. Not just millions, everything. The ledger access codes, the offshore accounts, the real estate deeds, all of it embedded in those stones." He sat up slowly, testing his recovered strength. "Lucy was always smarter than I gave her credit for. I thought she was playing my game. Turns out I was playing hers." Sandra stood and retrieved a first aid kit from her bag. She'd grabbed it from the hearse along with the guns and what little cash James had hidden in the vehicle. She sat beside him and started cleaning the cuts on his face from the gunfight, her touch efficient and impersonal. "So what now?" she asked. She has the diamonds, she has your empire, and she thinks you're either dead or will be soon. James caught her wrist, stopping her work. His grip was strong again, the old power returning to his bones. Now we take it all back. The ledger, the accounts, everything she stole. His eyes locked onto hers. But I can't do it alone. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees everything and who everyone overlooks. Sandra held his gaze, understanding the weight of what he was offering. Partnership, equality, a seat at a table she'd spent years cleaning. I'm a maid, she said quietly. You're a soldier. James released her wrist. You always were. I was just too stupid to see it. Sandra left James sleeping off the last of the poison and took the hearse into the city's service veins, the parts tourists never saw and rich people pretended didn't exist. She knew these streets better than James knew his own mansion. This was where the invisible people lived, the ones who cleaned toilets and pressed shirts, and knew every secret their employers thought they'd hidden. Her first stop was Maria's laundromat on Bleecker, where the morning shift was just starting. Rosa Delgado stood at the industrial presses, steam rising around her like fog, her hands moving in the rhythm of 30 years' muscle memory. She saw Sandra walk in and didn't change expression, but her eyes tracked to the back office. Sandra slipped through without a word. And in the cramped room that smelled like starch and old coffee, 3 other women were already waiting. Teresa from the Gallo estate, Kim, who did flowers for every mob wedding and funeral in the city, and Angela, who cooked for the commission meetings when the families needed neutral ground. You're supposed to be dead, Teresa said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Whole city's talking about how you kidnapped Don Verratti's corpse. He wasn't a corpse. Sandra pulled up a folding chair. Lucy tried to make him one, permanently. The women exchanged looks. They'd worked in this world long enough to know the difference between mob rumors and mob truth. Kim spoke first, her voice soft but certain. Lucy's been making calls, lots of them. She's hosting something at the estate tomorrow night. What kind of something? Memorial gala. That's what she's calling it. Angela pulled out her phone, scrolled through messages. I got the catering order yesterday. 150 guests. Top shelf everything. She wants it to look like a wake but feel like a coronation. Sandra leaned forward. Who's on the guest list? Everyone. Teresa's laugh was dark. All 5 families, even the ones who hate each other. Plus the Russians, the Irish, couple of city councilmen who don't know they're bought yet. It's not a memorial, it's a summit. Kim added, She's selling something, has to be. You don't gather that much power in one room unless you're making deals. Sandra's mind worked through the implications. Lucy wasn't just consolidating James's territory, she was redistributing it, selling pieces to the highest bidders, probably with the butcher taking the largest cut for backing her play. By the end of tomorrow night, the Verratti empire would be carved up and scattered, and Lucy would walk away rich enough to disappear forever. The ledger, Sandra said. She has to have it at the house. She'll need it to transfer accounts, prove she controls the assets. Rosa had joined them from the front, drying her hands on her apron. Angela, you're working the gala? They requested me specifically. Lucy wants everything perfect. Angela met Sandra's eyes. You want me to get you in? Can you? Kitchen entrance, 6 p.m. I'll need help with the setup. I always bring an assistant for events this size. She smiled, thin and sharp. My usual girl just called in sick. Teresa pulled out a folded paper from her pocket, smoothed it on the desk. It was a floor plan of the Verratti estate, hand-drawn but detailed. I cleaned there for 2 years before Gallo hired me. Main vaults in the master bedroom, behind the Monet. Secondary safe in the study. But if she's smart, she'll keep it on her. Sandra finished. Or nearby, somewhere she can control access. The study makes sense. Kim offered. It's where James used to do business. She'll want the symbolism. The widow claiming the throne in her husband's seat. Sandra studied the floor plan, committing it to memory. The estate was massive, 20 rooms across 3 floors, with security that had been tight even when James was alive. Now, with Lucy expecting threats, it would be a fortress. What about external security? She asked. Doubled since yesterday. Teresa said. The butcher sent 10 of his guys. They're doing perimeter sweeps every 20 minutes, plus Lucy's people inside, maybe 30 guns total. Cameras. Everywhere, but... Angela hesitated, then continued. Kitchen cameras have a blind spot near the service elevator. Always have. James never fixed it because he used to sneak down there to smoke cigars. Lucy thought he'd quit. The women sat in silence for a moment, each understanding what Sandra was planning and what it would cost if she failed. These weren't friends sharing gossip over coffee. This was the invisible army that kept the mob world running, deciding whether to go to war. Rosa spoke for all of them. Lucy fired 6 maids last week. No severance, no notice, just gone. Said she was cutting costs. She crossed her arms. We take care of our own. Sandra felt something shift in her chest, a weight she hadn't known she was carrying, suddenly lighter. She'd spent 3 years thinking she was alone in James's world, just another servant, disposable and forgotten. But these women had been watching, remembering, building their own networks in the spaces between the powerful men's wars. I need eyes, Sandra said. Everyone working that gala. I need to know where Lucy goes, who she talks to when she's alone. You'll have it, Angela promised. We'll use the catering group chat. Code words. More ice means she's in the study. Wine delivery means she's moving. Kim stood, already planning. I'm doing the flowers. I can leave equipment cases in strategic spots. Cameras. Maybe something useful. And if it goes wrong? Teresa asked. As the question they were all thinking. Sandra met her eyes. Then it goes wrong. But at least we tried. The motel room had transformed into a war room. James sat at the scarred desk with a laptop Sandra had bought cash from a pawn shop, pulling up blueprints and security protocols from memory. 3 years out of date, but the bones of the estate hadn't changed. He would know. He'd designed every security measure himself. The ledger's a tablet, James said, sketching the device on a notepad. Custom encrypted. Biometric lock. It controls every offshore account, every shell company, every real estate holding. Without it, Lucy has access to nothing. The diamonds are just rocks without the codes to move the money. Sandra stood behind him, studying the screen. She'd changed into clean clothes, black pants and a white shirt. The uniform of invisible labor. And you think she'll have it at the gala? She has to. The whole point of tomorrow night is to prove she controls my assets. The families won't hand over territory on promises. They'll want to see transfers happen in real time. Wire confirmations, account balances. He tapped the screen. She'll have the tablet in the study. That's where business happens, where I always kept it. Your wife knows you. She'll expect you to come for it. She thinks I'm half dead and alone. James turned in his chair to face her. She doesn't know about you. Not really. To her, you're just a maid who got lucky at the cemetery. She won't see you as a threat until it's too late. Sandra crossed her arms, thinking through the angles. Angela gets me in through the kitchen at 6. Gala starts at 7. I'll be working the floor, serving drinks, blending in with the other staff. No one looks at the help. Lucy does. She's paranoid. James pulled up a photo on the laptop, surveillance footage from the estate's main hall. See how she positions herself? Always with sight lines to the entrances, always near an exit. She's been planning this for months, Sandra. Every detail. She won't miss anything out of place. Then I won't be out of place. Sandra studied Lucy's patterns in the video, the way she moved through rooms, who she kept close. What about the butcher? He'll be there, sitting at her right hand like he already owns the place. James's jaw tightened. He's the real problem. Salvatore Gallo didn't get his nickname from being careless. He'll have soldiers positioned throughout the house, exits covered. Anyone who moves wrong gets stopped. Permanently. Sandra nodded slowly, her mind assembling the pieces. The kitchen staff group chat. Angela's team will track Lucy's position, feed me updates. When she goes to the study to run the transfers, that's our window. A window that'll last maybe 10 minutes. The families will want proof fast. They're not there to socialize. James stood, testing his legs. The strength had fully returned now, his body purged of the poison. But his face still looked like a corpse's, pale and drawn. He couldn't walk into that house without being recognized. I'll be outside, north side of the property. There's an old service road that runs along the fence line. When you get the tablet, you go out the kitchen exit and over the hedge. I'll have a car waiting. What if I can't get to it? What if she keeps it on her? Then we abort. We disappear, and we stay disappeared. He met her eyes. But we both know she won't keep it on her. Lucy wants theatre. She'll sit in my chair, at my desk, and she'll transfer my money while everyone watches. It's not about the money for her. It's about proving she beat me. Sandra walked to the window, peered through the gap in the curtains at the empty parking lot. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that tomorrow night someone would either die or disappear forever. There's a problem, she said quietly. Even if I get the tablet, even if we get out, Lucy will hunt us. The butcher will hunt us. Every family will want a piece of the person who stole their payday. I know. So we need leverage. Or something that keeps them from following. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man destroying everything he'd built. We delete it. All of it. Every account. Every record. We burn the whole empire to the ground. Sandra turned to face him. That's hundreds of millions of dollars. Your life's work. My life's work put me in a casket for 2 days. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm tired, Sandra. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of trusting people who'd sell me for the right price. Lucy taught me something lying in that coffin. You can't retire from this world. You can only make it so there's nothing left worth coming back for. And then what? We just walk away? We disappear, really disappear. New names, new country, or no connections to this life. He gestured at the laptop, at the plans spread across the desk. But first we make sure there's nothing left for Lucy to rule. No money, no power, just ashes. Sandra nodded slowly, the plan crystallizing. It was insane, suicidal, and it was the only way either of them survived past tomorrow night. I'll need a weapon, she said, something I can hide in the uniform. James pulled a compact pistol from his jacket, a Walther PPK, small enough to tuck into an apron pocket. 8 rounds, make them count. She took it, checked the weight, the balance. It felt like a promise and a death sentence wrapped together. Tomorrow night, then, Sandra said. Tomorrow night, James agreed. We either end this or it ends us. The Verratti estate blazed with light against the evening sky, and every window glowing like a challenge to the darkness. Sandra stood in the kitchen entrance with Angela, both of them carrying crates of champagne flutes that caught and fractured the light. Music drifted from the main hall, something classical and mournful, appropriate for a memorial that was really a hostile takeover. Lucy's in the parlor, Angela murmured, barely moving her lips. Greeting guests, the butcher's with her. They look like a couple already. Sandra adjusted her grip on the crate, keeping her face neutral as they moved through the service corridor. The kitchen was controlled chaos, 20 staff members moving in choreographed precision, plating appetizers and pouring drinks for an audience of wolves in evening wear. She recognized half of them from jobs across the city. Maria from the Gallo house, Sarah who worked for the Russians. They met her eyes for just a moment, acknowledgement without words, then returned to their work. Before I continue, I need you to subscribe, and like if you haven't. Your support means a whole lot. Let's continue. On the ridge 300 yards north, James lay in the tall grass with a rifle he'd pulled from one of his old caches. Through the scope he could see the lit windows, the shadows of guests moving inside. His earpiece crackled with the kitchen frequency, coded updates flowing in steady rhythm. Ice delivery to parlor. Lucy moving. Wine check in study. Someone entering the room they needed. Sandra worked her way onto the main floor, carrying a tray of champagne through the crowd. The great hall had been transformed into a shrine to James Verratti. Blown-up photos on easels, and as white flowers cascading from every surface, candles flickering in arrangements that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Guests in designer black mingled and murmured, their grief as authentic as the blonde in Lucy's hair. She spotted Lucy holding court near the marble fireplace, resplendent in widow's silk that managed to be both modest and devastating. The butcher stood at her elbow, his thick hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Lucy was laughing at something a Russian underboss had said, her performance flawless. The grieving widow, strong in her loss, ready to move forward. Sandra kept her head down and her tray high, moving through the crowd like water, formless and unremarkable. But her heart hammered against her ribs when she passed close enough to hear Lucy's voice. James would have wanted the family to stay strong, Lucy was saying, her hand touching a silver locket at her throat. That's why we're all here, to honor his legacy by ensuring his work continues. Translation: to carve up his empire like a birthday cake. Sandra's phone buzzed once in her pocket. James, confirming he had visual on the study windows. 2 guards posted outside the door, another 3 roaming the second floor. The butcher's men, professional and alert. She made her way back to the kitchen, set down the empty tray, and found the coffee station Angela had prepared. 3 carafes sat warming, labels marking them for different parts of the house. Guest service, kitchen staff, security detail. Sandra pulled a small vial from her pocket, the same tetrodotoxin derivative that had put James in his coffin, just a fraction of the dose. Not enough to kill, just enough to make grown men sleepy, clumsy, slow to react. She uncapped it carefully, hand steady despite the adrenaline singing in her blood. More ice needed upstairs. The code. Lucy was moving toward the study. Sandra emptied the vial into the security carafe, watching the clear liquid disappear into the dark coffee. Within 20 minutes, the guards would start feeling it. 30 minutes, they'd be struggling to stay alert. In an hour, they'd be useless. She picked up a fresh tray, this one with specific drinks Angela had marked for the study. Bourbon neat for the butcher, Pinot Noir for Lucy, and coffee, already doctored, for the guards who'd be standing post outside while the real business happened inside. Going up, she said quietly to Angela. Flower delivery confirmed. Kim's voice in her earpiece, hidden and coded. Translation: cameras in position. Sandra climbed the servants' stairs, the same route she'd taken 1,000 times carrying laundry and breakfast trays. Muscle memory guided her through the narrow passages until she emerged on the second floor, just around the corner from the study. The guards were there, exactly where James said they'd be. Young guys, competent but bored, dressed in suits that couldn't quite hide the shoulder holsters underneath. One was checking his phone. The other stared at the hallway with the glazed expression of someone who'd been standing too long. Sandra approached with the tray, her smile tired and apologetic. Mrs. Verratti sent coffee. Said you guys have been working all night. The phone guard looked up, or assessed her in half a second. Middle-aged woman, server uniform, no threat, and reached for a cup. "Thanks, it's been a long one." His partner took the second cup, already drinking before Sandra had even stepped back. She moved past them toward the study door, knocked twice. "Drinks, Mrs. Verratti." Lucy's voice came through, sharp and imperial. "Leave them outside." Sandra set the tray on the console table, placed the bourbon and wine carefully, and retreated back down the hall. Behind her, she heard one of the guards stifle a yawn. Then another. The drug was fast-acting, designed to look like natural exhaustion until it was too late to matter. In her ear, James's voice came through low and controlled. "I have the study window. 2 heat signatures inside. No movement in the adjacent rooms." Sandra descended back to the kitchen, her role as server complete. Now came the hard part. Now came the waiting, while the poison did its work, and Lucy made the mistake James knew she couldn't resist, sitting in his chair, at his desk, believing she'd already won. "Guest approaching kitchen." Angela's voice tense now. "Male. Gallo colors." Sandra's hand found the Walther in her pocket as footsteps echoed in the service hall. The heist was about to get complicated. The footsteps in the service hall belonged to one of the butcher's lieutenants, thick-necked and suspicious, checking the kitchen like he expected to find conspirators huddled over the stoves. Sandra kept her back to him, hands busy with dish racks, just another invisible body in the machinery of service. He scanned the room, grunted, and moved on. The tension in the kitchen didn't break until his footsteps faded. "Ah, guards are down," came the whisper through Sandra's earpiece. James, watching through the scope. "Both slumped against the wall. Lucy's still in the study with the butcher. You've got maybe 10 minutes before someone notices." But Sandra was already moving, slipping away from the kitchen chaos and up the back stairs. Not to the study. James had been wrong about that, she realized now. Lucy wouldn't keep the ledger where business happened, where anyone could grab it during the chaos of transfers and negotiations. She'd keep it where it had always been kept, in the place that represented the real seat of power. The master bedroom. Sandra's feet made no sound on the Persian runner as she approached the double doors at the end of the hall. Unlocked. Of course they were. Lucy's arrogance was as predictable as her ambition. The room beyond was exactly as Sandra remembered from 3 years of changing sheets and dusting furniture. Massive 4-poster bed, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds, and on the far wall, the Monet that had cost more than most people's houses. She crossed to it quickly, hands finding the frame's hidden releases. The painting swung outward on smooth hinges, revealing the vault behind. Biometric lock, but Sandra had watched James open it enough times to know the override code he thought no one else had memorized. Her fingers flew across the keypad. Birth date of James's mother, dead 20 years, the only person he'd ever really loved. The lock clicked. The vault opened. Empty. Looking for this? Sandra spun, hand diving for the Walther, but froze. Lucy stood in the doorway, the tablet in one hand and a nickel-plated .38 in the other. She'd changed since the parlor, traded the widow's silk for something sleek and practical, her hair pulled back in a way that said she was done performing. "I knew you'd come up here eventually," Lucy said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her with her heel. "James always said you were smarter than you looked. I should have listened." Sandra's hand stayed in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the Walther's grip. "You drugged him. Your own husband." "My own mistake, you mean?" Lucy moved to the window, keeping the gun trained on Sandra but glancing outside like she was expecting something. "I was 23 when James married me. Pretty and poor and stupid enough to think love mattered in this world. He taught me better. Every mistress, every lie, every time he looked through me like I was furniture." "So you decided to bury him alive? I decided to take what should have been mine from the start." Lucy's voice was ice and old fury. 20 years I played the perfect wife. 20 years of smiling at his associates and hosting his dinners and pretending I didn't know what he did in the basement of his clubs. And what did I get? An allowance. An allowance, like I was a child, while he controlled billions. Sandra eased her hand out of her pocket, empty, buying time. In her ear, James's voice crackled. He was moving, leaving the ridge, but he was still 3 minutes out. You could have divorced him. Lucy laughed, sharp and bitter. You don't divorce a man like James Verratti. You don't leave this life. He taught me that too. So I learned the lesson and I applied it. She raised the tablet. This is freedom. This is power that doesn't come from being someone's wife or someone's whore. This is mine. The butcher helped you. Salvatore is a useful idiot who thinks he's getting half the empire. He'll have an accident next month. Tragic. Unexpected. Lucy's smile was a blade. I'm done sharing power with men who think I'm decoration. The window behind Lucy exploded inward in a shower of glass and moonlight. James came through it on a rappel line, boots first, the rifle slung across his back and a pistol already drawn. He hit the floor rolling, came up with the gun trained on Lucy's center mass. Hello, darling, he said, his voice like gravel. Miss me? Lucy's face went white, then red, cycling through shock and rage in the space of a heartbeat. But her gun never wavered from Sandra, and the tablet stayed clutched in her other hand. A three-way standoff, nobody willing to move first because everyone knew the first move would be the last. You're supposed to be dead, Lucy breathed. The dose I gave you should have been twice that. James finished. But you got greedy. Wanted to make sure I suffered long enough to know what you'd done. Classic mistake. I'll shoot her. Lucy's gun pressed harder toward Sandra. I'll kill your little housemaid and then you, and I'll tell everyone you both attacked me at my own husband's memorial. Sandra found her voice, steady despite the barrel pointed at her chest. Then you'll never get out of this room. The staff knows I'm here. They know what you did. Fire that gun and you won't make it to the stairs. Lucy's eyes darted between them, calculating odds, weighing survival against victory. The tablet in her hand represented everything she'd killed for, schemed for, destroyed a marriage for. But the guns in the room meant she might not live to enjoy it. Stalemate, she said finally. James shook his head slowly. No, Lucy. Checkmate. You just don't know it yet. The stalemate shattered when footsteps pounded up the hallway, heavy boots, multiple men responding to the sound of breaking glass. Lucy's eyes flickered toward the door for just a fraction of a second, and Sandra moved. She threw herself sideways, drawing the Walther as she dropped. Lucy's shot went wide, punching into the wall where Sandra's head had been. James fired twice, to controlled bursts that forced Lucy to dive behind the bed. The tablet skittered across the hardwood floor. Sandra lunged for it, fingers closing around the metal case just as the bedroom door exploded inward. The butcher's men flooded through, guns drawn, and the room became a killing box. James put down the first two with headshots before they could even acquire targets. Sandra rolled behind the dresser, the Walther barking in her hand, and caught a third in the shoulder. He spun and went down. But more were coming. She could hear them in the hallway, on the stairs, converging on the master bedroom like sharks drawn to blood. Move! James grabbed Sandra's arm and hauled her toward the shattered window. They went through it together, rappel line singing as they descended to the veranda below. Bullets chewed through the window frame above them, showering them with splinters and broken glass. They hit the veranda running. James kicked through the French doors into the second-floor library, Sandra right behind him. The tablet was a hard weight against her ribs, shoved inside her shirt, the edges digging into her skin. Behind them, men were already rappelling down, following their escape route. The stairs. James said, reloading as they ran through the library. "We get to the main floor, we can reach the kitchen exit." They burst into the hallway and immediately took fire from both directions. The gala had collapsed into chaos, guests screaming and running, mixing with soldiers trying to find targets. James and Sandra pressed their backs together, moving down the corridor in tandem, each covering the other's blind spots. The grand staircase loomed ahead, sweeping marble steps that descended into the main hall, where an hour ago people had been drinking champagne and mourning a man who wasn't dead. Now it was a war zone. James started down first, Sandra covering their six. A guard appeared on the landing above, and she put 2 rounds center mass without thinking. He tumbled past them, his gun clattering down the stairs. 3 more came from the parlor entrance, and James fired controlled bursts that sent them diving for cover behind overturned furniture. Halfway down the stairs, a bullet grazed Sandra's shoulder. She gasped but didn't stop moving, the adrenaline numbing everything except the need to keep going. Blood soaked through her white shirt, stark and spreading. "I'm fine," she said before James could ask, though her vision swam for a moment. As they reached the main floor and the fighting intensified, the butcher's men were professionals, coordinating their attack, using the architecture for cover. But James had designed this house, knew every angle and sight line. He put a round through a vase that exploded in an attacker's face, buying them 3 seconds to cross to the dining room. That's when Sandra smelled smoke. Someone had knocked over candles in the chaos, and the curtains had caught. Fire was crawling up the wall behind them, spreading fast across fabric and antique wood that had been drying for 100 years. The house was becoming an inferno. They fought through the dining room, overturning the massive table for cover. Sandra's gun clicked empty, and she grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon without breaking stride. James was down to his last magazine, making every shot count. A figure appeared in the kitchen doorway, Lucy, soot-stained and wild-eyed, her gun tracking toward James. But Angela stepped out from behind the industrial refrigerator and swung a cast-iron skillet with all the strength of 30 years hauling commercial cookware. It connected with Lucy's skull with a sound like a cracked egg. Lucy crumpled. "Go!" Angela shouted, already retreating deeper into the kitchen as bullets punched through the walls. James scooped up Lucy's unconscious body, throwing her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. Sandra stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "We need her alive," he grunted. "Trust me." They burst through the kitchen exit into the cool night air, lungs burning from smoke and exertion. Behind them, the Verratti estate was fully ablaze, flames licking out of windows, the roof starting to cave. Guests and soldiers alike were fleeing into the grounds. The gala turned into a disaster scene. James dumped Lucy on the grass near the hedge line and pulled out a phone. Not his destroyed one, but a burner Sandra hadn't known he was carrying. He dialed a number from memory. "FBI tip line. I want to report a crime in progress." His voice was steady, clinical. The Verratti estate, 1247 Hillcrest Drive. Multiple homicides, money laundering, racketeering. The person responsible is Lucy Verratti, and she's lying unconscious on the north lawn. You'll want to move fast. Half the city's organized crime is here, and they're all armed. He ended the call and looked at Sandra, smoke and blood on both of them, the empire burning behind them. "That's it?" Sandra asked. "You're just handing her to the FBI. She wanted my throne. Now she can have it, along with the RICO charges, the murder conspiracy, all of it." James started walking toward the hedge line where a car was waiting, something Angela's network had positioned hours ago. Let her explain to the feds how she tried to bury her husband alive. Let her cut deals and turn on the butcher. Let them all eat each other. Sandra followed, clutching the tablet, understanding finally what James had meant about burning the empire. Not just the money, the people too. Everyone who'd helped Lucy. everyone who'd carved up his territory while he lay paralyzed. He was feeding them all to law enforcement like gasoline on a fire. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. They had maybe 2 minutes before the property was swarming with federal agents and local police. The ledger, Sandra said. We still need to. I know. James took it from her, his fingers moving across the screen with the ease of long familiarity. One more stop, then we disappear forever. The FBI descended on the Verratti estate like an occupying force, black SUVs screaming up the circular drive while helicopters circled overhead, spotlights turning night into artificial day. Lucy Verratti came to consciousness with zip ties on her wrists and an agent reading her rights over the roar of the burning mansion behind them. They found the butcher trying to escape through the gardens, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. They found 3 city councilmen hiding in the wine cellar, suddenly unable to explain why they were at a mob gala. They found enough evidence in the study safe, the one Lucy had been too arrogant to empty, to build RICO cases against 24 high-level criminals. What they didn't find was James Verratti or the woman who'd crashed his funeral. Sandra drove them to the marina in a Honda Civic so anonymous it hurt to look at, courtesy of Maria's cousin who asked no questions and expected no answers. James sat in the passenger seat with the tablet on his lap, his fingers dancing across the screen in the rhythm of a man dismantling his own legacy. Account 774. He muttered, more to himself than to her. Transfer to the Cayman Island Charity for Refugee Children. Done. Account 889, the Luxembourg Holding Company. That one goes to the Domestic Violence Shelter Network. They do good work. They'll need it. Sandra watched the road, the city lights blurring past, leaving behind everything she'd known for 3 years. How much are you giving away? All of it. Every dollar I ever made, every asset I ever bought with blood money. His voice was quiet, almost dreamlike. 240 million to organizations that help people leave violent situations. 30 million to the families of people my organization hurt. The rest split between workers' rights groups and legal aid societies. He paused, finger hovering over the final confirmation. Lucy wanted power. I'm making sure there's nothing left to have power over. He pressed delete on the offshore accounts, wiped the shell companies, dissolved the holding corporations. 30 years of empire building erased in 30 minutes of careful keystrokes. When he was done, he pulled out the tablet SIM card. I snapped it in half and dropped the device over the side of the bridge they were crossing. It hit the water with a splash that nobody but them would ever hear. The boat was waiting at Slip 47, a modest 30-footer with enough fuel to reach international waters and then some. No name on the hull, no registration that would trace back to anyone who mattered. Just another vessel in a marina full of forgotten dreams. They cast off as dawn broke over the city, the skyline turning gold and pink like a postcard of someone else's life. Sandra stood at the rail and watched it recede. All those buildings full of people who'd never know how close they'd come to a mob war that would have torn the streets apart. Behind them, smoke still rose from the Verratti estate, visible even from the water. A funeral pyre for a life that had finally, truly ended. James joined her at the rail, his funeral suit replaced with jeans and a windbreaker that made him look like any other middle-aged man running away from a midlife crisis. No regrets? He asked. Sandra thought about it, really thought about it. About the bullet scar on her shoulder that would ache when it rained. About the women in the laundromat who'd risked everything to help her. About Lucy's face when she realized her perfect plan had been undone by the people she'd thought beneath her notice. No, she said finally. No regrets. 3 months later, they sat on a beach in Costa Rica, where the sand was white and the water was impossible shades of blue. No extradition treaty, no mob presence, no past that mattered anymore, James wore board shorts and was developing a tan that would have horrified the man who used to run a criminal empire. Sandra had let her hair grow out, trading the tight bun of service for something wild and free. "So," James said, digging his toes into the sand, "what do you want to do? We've got the rest of our lives and no plan for any of it." Sandra looked at him, at this man who'd been a boss and a body and finally a partner. She looked at the ocean that stretched forever, at a future that belonged to no one but them. And she smiled, not the tight, professional smile of a woman who cleaned up after criminals, but something genuine and vast and utterly uncomplicated. "I'm retired," she said. James laughed, the sound carrying across the beach, and for the first time in 30 years it was a laugh, without calculation or weight or the shadow of violence behind it. "Yeah," he agreed. "Me too." They sat there as the sun set over water that had never heard of the Verratti family, or the 5 families, or the butcher, or any of it. Somewhere back in the States, trials were beginning. Empires were crumbling. The invisible army of maids and cooks and drivers were inheriting the wreckage, building something different in the spaces the powerful men had left behind. But that was someone else's story now. This story ended here, with 2 ghosts on a beach, alive despite every odd, free despite every chain. Sometimes the only way to win the game is to burn the board and walk away. Sometimes the help knows more than the masters ever suspected. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who were supposed to be invisible become the only ones who really see. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and the invisible army that changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Drop a comment below. Which moment had you on the edge of your seat? Was it Sandra crashing the funeral, the burning mansion shootout, or the final beach scene? Let me know what you'd like to see next. Until then, remember, the most dangerous people in any room are the ones nobody notices. Stay sharp, stay free, and I'll see you in the next story.